There is one number that explains this entire story, and it wasn't in the announcement. 74.9%. That is NVIDIA's gross margin last quarter on $81 billion of revenue, which means that of roughly every $4 the world spends on NVIDIA chips, 3 of them are gross profit. Today, Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, confirmed it is building its own. And I think almost every headline you'll read about this gets it backwards. Because Anthropic already escaped NVIDIA. It escaped years ago, which makes the actual question far more interesting. Why would a company that already runs on 1 million custom chips go and build another one? Let me show you what's really happening here. Let's establish something first, because most of the coverage went straight past it. Anthropic is probably the largest consumer of non-NVIDIA AI silicon on the planet. Right now, Claude runs on more than 1 million of Amazon's Trainium 2 chips. Anthropic separately signed for up to 1 million of Google's TPUs. It has committed over $100 billion to AWS across the next decade, in a deal covering up to 5 gigawatts of capacity. And through Google and Broadcom, it has roughly 3.5 more gigawatts of custom TPU capacity arriving from 2027. That is not a company trapped by NVIDIA. That is a company that already built the escape route, twice, using somebody else's silicon. So the breaking free from NVIDIA story that will run everywhere today isn't exactly wrong. It's just about 4 years late. The real story is different, and it's better. Here's the thing about running on Trainium and TPU. Amazon decides what Trainium 4 looks like. Google decides what the next TPU looks like. Anthropic gets to ask nicely. And look at who those two companies actually are. Amazon sells its own models. Google has Gemini. Anthropic is renting its factory floor from 2 direct competitors, and the specification of that floor is set by them, on their schedule, for their priorities. That's a perfectly fine position when compute is a cost line. It is a dangerous position when compute is the product. And for Anthropic, it is now the product. Its run rate revenue went from around $9 billion at the end of 2025 to over $30 billion. Almost all of that is tokens, and increasingly, coding agents, which don't ask one question and leave. They run for hours. They burn tokens by the billion. When your entire business is selling inference, the cost of inference isn't an expense line. It is your gross margin. It's the whole company. Now here's the engineering problem underneath all of this, and I think it's the most interesting thing in the story. Designing a chip takes years. You freeze the architecture, you tape it out, you wait on a fab, you validate it, and somewhere 2 to 4 years later, silicon comes back. Roughly $500 million, spent, before you know whether it works. Now compare that to an AI model. 3 months and the architecture is moved. That mismatch is the reason nobody did this earlier. You cannot etch a moving target into silicon. Any chip you design for today's model arrives in time for a model that no longer exists. So what changed? The target stopped moving. The transformer has now held its shape long enough that the things hardware actually cares about, attention, the key value cache, matrix multiplication at very specific low precisions, have stopped shifting underneath it. For the first time, you can freeze them. And OpenAI just proved the timeline can collapse. In June, it unveiled Jalapeno, its inference chip with Broadcom, blank sheet design, 9 months start to finish, which they called the fastest ASIC development cycle ever achieved. And part of how they did it was using their own models to help design it. Sit with that one for a second. They used the AI to design the chip that runs the AI. That loop is now closed. It only gets faster from here. Okay, I want to be upfront here. Because there's a version of this video that oversells, and I'm not going to make it. Anthropic has not built a chip. Anthropic has posted a job listing. That is the actual news. Openings paying $320,000 to $485,000 a year for engineers who have personally shipped silicon. No tape-out date. No confirmed fab. There are reports of talks with Samsung, but nothing signed publicly. No product. No timeline at all. And the historical record here is humbling. Google's TPU is the success story of custom AI silicon, and it took roughly a decade and several generations before it was genuinely competitive at the frontier. Amazon has been grinding on Trainium for years and is only now reaching its 3rd and 4th generation. This is not something you buy. It's something you survive. Anthropic's own language admits it. They said multi-chip approach. AWS, Google, NVIDIA, and AMD all remain essential. That is not press release hedging. That is a company telling you, honestly, that it will be buying other people's chips for years. And the deepest risk is the one I just described, in reverse. If you freeze an architecture into silicon, and the architecture then moves, if the next big idea isn't a transformer, you have spent $500 million building an extremely expensive machine for solving last year's problem. So why do it anyway? Because the alternative is worse. If you never design silicon, you are permanently downstream of 4 companies who each decide independently what your product is allowed to cost. And cost per token is the only lever that genuinely moves the economics of an AI company. Not price, not marketing, cost. There's a second reason, and I suspect it's the one that actually drove the decision. A chip program does not have to ship to be worth having. The moment you can credibly design your own, every conversation you have with NVIDIA, with AMD, with Amazon, with Google changes. You stop being a customer and start being an option. Companies have run silicon programs for years for that reason alone. And the tell is in the job description. They didn't advertise for researchers. They advertise for people who have shipped silicon and have, their words, a realistic relationship with schedules. That's not a research hire. That's a manufacturing hire. So here's my honest read. Nothing changes in 2026. Probably nothing changes in 2027 either. Anthropic will keep buying Trainium, keep buying TPUs, keep buying NVIDIA. But look at the pattern instead of the announcement. Google built a chip, Amazon built a chip, Meta built a chip, Microsoft built a chip, OpenAI built a chip. Today, Anthropic said it's building a chip. Every one of those companies is a major NVIDIA customer, and every one of them is now spending hundreds of millions of dollars for the specific purpose of buying less from NVIDIA. That's what I keep coming back to. NVIDIA's problem was never AMD. NVIDIA's problem is that a 75% margin isn't a moat, it's a bounty. It is the single largest incentive you can possibly hand your own customers to go and replace you. 5 years ago, the question in AI was, who has the best model? It isn't anymore. It's who owns the factory.